HuiNeng, who is our sixth Chinese ancestor. And this is the next one in this book that was written by Anne's teacher. So that I didn't know that until today. So that's really fun, and maybe you can give us some insight into her teaching, Anne. So we started with Bodhidharma, who is our first Chinese ancestor, and we know who his Dharma heir was, Wike, but we don't know so much about what the ancestors between that and the sixth ancestor, and so we will talk about the fifth ancestor a little bit, but so it's skipping over about 100 years from Bodhidharma to HuiNeng, and actually about 200 years after Bodhidharma. And we learn about HuiNeng through a writing known as the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Ancestor, which was not written by him, it's thought, but actually by one of his disciples. And also through the transmission of the lamp, the purported history of the development of Chan Buddhism, and written some 350 years later after HuiNeng's death. So it's although the Platform Sutra is attributed to HuiNeng, it probably isn't his words, but reflects his teaching. And how much of his story is history and how much of it is myth is impossible to know. But it's clear that his story is very important in the development of Chan, later known as the Japanese word Zen. And interestingly, again, like Bodhidharma, his story is about someone who lived and practiced and taught outside of the conventional pattern of Buddhist study and practice in contemporary China. And so here's his story. He was not a scholar, and he was not even literate. He was not knowledgeable about literature and scripture and philosophy. He was actually a poor man. He was of very low social status. He was an illiterate laborer who sold firewood to support his widowed mother. And one day, the story goes, he heard an itinerant teacher teaching the Diamond Sutra and had a sudden awakening. Then, as the story goes, he was invited by local townspeople to join their temple, but he knew that he needed to seek further, to seek what he called the great teaching. Something struck him, and he knew he had to keep going. He couldn't, as it is said, go just halfway. Something similar must have happened to each of us, I think. Some internal drive is met by something that we read or hear or experience, and we find ourselves studying Zen for 20, 30, 40, 50 years for the rest of our life. And once you're caught by it, you can't escape. So what is that? What is that for each of us? So HuiNeng went on the road and sought a teacher. And he found the teacher called Honggren, who is the fifth Chinese ancestor, who is a leader of a monastic community and who is, as I said, now considered the fifth Chinese ancestor. And there, the practice was based on Bodhidharma's teaching, that is based in meditation, based in the teaching of Prajnaparamita, the wisdom of emptiness, but which was still unique in Chinese Buddhist practice, the practice itself, not the teaching of it, but the practice itself. And because Chinese Buddhist practice in general was more focused on intellectual study, philosophy, and understanding at that time. HuiNeng wanted to be a monk, but he lacked the social position and the education to be one. But after a conversation with Hongren, in which he convinced the teacher of his sincerity, he was allowed to begin work in the monastery's rice mill in order to prove his ability to accept his circumstances, whatever they might be. And his commitment, his sincerity, his ability to abide in unwanted circumstances, accepting just this, continued to grow. Although he couldn't enter the Dharma hall and become a monk, he must have somehow absorbed the teachings, maybe by again overhearing conversations among the monks or seeking scraps of training wherever he could, but mainly by paying deep attention to the Buddha Dharma, to the vast, great mind of Buddha. One day, Hongren challenged his students to show their understanding of the great matter of birth and death by writing a verse. And most of the monks did not have the courage to present a verse, and which is interesting because yesterday I was attending a seminar online at San Francisco Zen Center. There were maybe about 50 people in attendance, and one of the things that they mentioned was their practice at San Francisco Zen Center of stepping forward and moving back. That is, if you tend to be the first person to talk, that you step back. And if you tend not to talk and not to participate in the discussion, you step forward. So I think that's a wonderful practice for us to consider. And in any case, these ancient monks, most of them did not step forward. So finally, the head monk, I think he must have felt he really has to do something because he's the head monk after all. And so he offered a verse, and he wrote it on the wall of the monastery because he didn't want to be identified with it in case it was wrong. So here's what he wrote. Let's see. He wrote, the body is the tree of wisdom, the mind but a bright mirror. At all times diligently polish it to remain untainted by dust. And Hongren, his teacher, read the verse and said that the head monk had only arrived at the outside of the gate. He said, you must enter the gate and see your own original nature. And HuiNeng realized that seeing this and listening to it, realized that he actually had a further insight. And he asked someone to write his verse for him on the wall because he still could not write. And this is what his verse said. It said, the tree of wisdom fundamentally does not exist, nor is there a stand for the mirror. Originally, there is not a single thing. So where would dust alight? And so, do you see the difference? That HuiNeng saw through existence into emptiness, to non-existence as the fundamental reality. Hongren realized he had a true disciple, but he also realized that bringing HuiNeng forward would cause disruption in the community. In recognition of his understanding, Hongren gave HuiNeng his robe and bowls, symbols of teaching authority, which persist down to the present day. But he did this in secret in order not to upset the monks by bringing someone forward who didn't have their qualifications and history of study. And he sent HuiNeng away to secure his safety. When the monks found out, they were so angry that they set out to capture HuiNeng and to test him. HuiNeng saw them coming, and he took the robe and the bowl and put them on a rock. The leader of the monks saw them, and he went to pick them up, but he couldn't lift them. They were too heavy for him. And he suddenly realized that HuiNeng was a true teacher. HuiNeng asked him, "What is your true face?" to help him back through to ultimate reality. And that's a question for each of us. What is your true face? And then the student said, "Is there anything more?" So let me read you what HuiNeng said to that. He said, "I have not revealed anything that is a secret. If you reflect on your original face, in other words, if you go beyond your self-created identity and reflect on who you really are, you will find that the secret is in you." And doesn't that remind you of Dogen? To follow the way of Buddha is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Then HuiNeng went into hiding for 15 years, and it's not known why. And later he visited a monastery where he overheard two monks having an argument about a flag flying above the Dharma hall. And this is the story about that encounter. So this is an argument about the flag. One monk said, "The flag moves," while the other said, "The wind moves." This argument continued until HuiNeng walked over to them and said, "It is not the wind that moves, it is not the flag that moves, it is your mind that moves." And the two monks were struck with awe. Later, HuiNeng became the abbot of a monastery, emphasizing meditation as the way to enlightenment, outside of the scriptures and scholarship, outside of intellectual understanding. And this is still, a challenge for us in the present day, because we rely so much on information, on learning, on knowledge, and on intellectual understanding, and we prize it. But our practice is to see all of the limitations of all of that, and to see a reality that cannot be pointed to with words. His teaching is compiled in the Platform Sutra, which Abels calls the only Buddhist text that is not a direct teaching of the Buddha to be called a sutra. And he died at age 75. So next time we'll delve into the Platform Sutra a little bit.